Hello and welcome to Kings of the Hill, your channel for competitive 40K in Germany. We are still in our ITC Focus Week, and today we're here with a very special episode. We have some of the best players in the world of 40K, probably in the history of the game, and we'll interview them about their history and how they became competitive, and also tips for you guys in how you can raise your game. And we'll be back after the intro.
No game without terrain.
All right. So, to present to you the people we have today in our panel in the discussion, the two moderators that you know from the channel already, Adrian and myself, will be moderating through. And as you know, we're reasonably new into the competitive scene, but we're very ambitious and eager to learn. So, this will also be an excellent opportunity for us to learn from some of the best players in the world, starting off with Skari, the Dark Archon, who you all know probably also from the channel already, but he is an ETC Team Canada player. He's been to ETC twice, and he's currently the assistant captain of Team Canada. He runs his own channel, Skaredcast. If you haven't checked that out, which I think you have already, but do check it out. It'll be in the description of this video underneath. He is also very famous for playing mono drukhari and sticking to it, even though times might be rougher. And he is, I think, through the years, always been one of the top drukhari players in the ITC world rankings.
I will also take all your souls.
That for sure, but only after the podcast is recorded, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Moving on to Simon, also known as Braindead, one of the best players in Germany. He's been to ETC, I think we discussed, and it's about 10 times or something. And he's won it about 3 times. He couldn't remember, which I think is a statement in itself, but I think he won ETC 3 times with Team Germany. He has won various national and international tournaments, most notably the Baltic Cup, the biggest tournament in Germany. I think he's won that about 3 times. So I think all those successes speak for themselves when we talk about Simon or Braindead.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on. It's real. The honor is on us. And next in line is Nick Nanavati. I think everyone knows him. I think he's usually been introduced as the man who doesn't need an introduction, but we're still introducing him here. He's been to ETC, I think, 7 times. He's been the only person, I think, in the world who's won the ETC with 2 different teams. He's been on Team UK, where he's won the last ETC, and he's previously been on Team USA, where he's also won the ETC. He's won Adepticon, I think, 4 times, the Nova Invitational. He's won the overall ITC, and he's won LVO, and I think many, many more, but that would probably be the full podcast. So we'll stop here, but I think everyone knows Nick, and his successes as well speak for himself.
Thanks for the kind words.
Absolutely. I mean, we're honored to have you, Nick.
Maybe one thing here, Hanjo, that was interesting. What age were you, Nick, when you won your first big tournament?
My first big tournament was Adepticon, where I won, and I was 18 years old. And I started playing competitively when I was like 14 or something.
Adrian, are we too late in the game?
I don't know, but let's make the best out of it.
Absolutely. So, guys, the 4th person in the lineup who was super keen to make it is Adam Camilleri from Australia. For those of you who don't know him, he is in the team ETC Team Australia pretty much forever. He's also one of the founders of Down Under Pairings. Unfortunately, at the time of the podcast where we recorded, it's very early in the morning, so I don't know what happened to him. He might join later. We hope so, and then we'll just keep going with adding Adam to the discussion. But at this point in time, we don't know whether he overslept or what happened to him. But he was the 4th person that was planned to be in the podcast here. In terms of the agenda, what we want to do with you, what we want to discuss today is three things mainly. We want to go through and give you a bit of background on the players in terms of who they are as competitive players, how they see their own competitive playstyle, and how they've grown to the monsters they are at this point in time. Second, talk about their views on the meta, the non-existing meta, but also differences that they've experienced playing across different countries and geographies. And then last but not least, to give you some practical tips in how to improve your play and become a better 40K player. So with that said, Adrian, why don't you kick it off with the first section?
Yeah, sure, Hanjo. Thank you very much for this very nice overview. So we are all really excited to have this podcast with you guys, and we just kick it off with the first section. We have a couple of questions lined up, but we also go for the feeling here. You know, what's interesting for us, and also what's interesting for our listeners and viewers. So, the first question, which we find very interesting, would be for you guys. You know, was there a specific moment or a defining moment where you told yourself, you know what, competing in 40K at the highest level, you know, that's really what I want to do. And that's really where I want to excel and, you know, reach the highest level, worldwide. So, that would be the first question. And I think from the order we would go as we introduced for now. So Skari first, then Simon, and then Nick.
Well, I've always enjoyed competition. I feel like when I was starting the game, I've been playing the game itself about 20 years, and it was more of a hobby for me. I really got into like my first ever tournament that I really did well at was when I was in university, which was quite a few years ago, and I walked away with the best general. And since then, I was hooked. I just really loved kind of not necessarily. I didn't have the money to spend on buying the best, like most amazing net list or the best units. So I had to learn how to use the units that I had on a limited budget and apply them properly on the table because I didn't really have a large collection. So that really kind of helped hone my skills. Recently, it was in 2018 when I won the Sudbury, the Basement Collective Open, essentially. That was my first major win. And I did it with a brand new Drukhari Codex at the time.
Very nice.
I went on to win the Capital C Bloodbath that year. That was my first year at the ETC. And that sort of really spearheaded my competitive career was in 2018 when I really got serious. But that first major win, that really kind of gave me the confidence to really take it seriously.
All right, so that was kind of the taste of blood, you know, and you wanted more. So, okay.
Yes,
Taste of soul.
blood and souls. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Skari. Thanks a lot. So, Simon, how about you?
I was just thinking about it because when I started, I was playing Warhammer Fantasy by the time much more than 40K. And I started out in the basement, probably like most of us did, on a table tennis table, and we just played fantasy over the whole table. And by that time, there were very little 40K tournaments. So my first tournament I ever went to, and actually was the first one I ever won too. Don't know how I managed to do that. Was a Warhammer Fantasy tournament. But that got me hooked. I can still remember that day. I think I was playing Chaos Warriors back then. But that also was the time when you had to take the miniatures that you owned and just went for it. And there was nothing about just going and buying the good stuff and just net listing and then getting the collection from whatever online dealers. So you just looked at what you had in your basement and then just went to the tournament and basically not thinking about any strategies or meta or opponents, just going there and having fun. And that was what hooked me. And I can very much echo what Skari said, that I think what drives most of the better 40K players is the sort of the enjoyment of competition. And I think that what keeps us coming back. And for me personally as well, I mean, I had a hiatus for like 2.5, 3 years. I didn't really play that much. Just came back last year. And that's for the enjoyment of the competition once the game, from at least to my eyes, got better when the 8th edition started. So yeah, it was really about fantasy in the first place when I was quite a kid back then.
Oh wow, that's also a nice story, because you already answered it. My a side question would have been, okay, you went to the tournament. Did you have like a super game plan or something like that? But you just went up and you just somehow destroyed the people at once. So that's nice. That's
the plan was
kind of
to
romantic.
get my mother to pick me up after the game was done.
Nice. All right. Thanks so much, Simon. So let's move on to Nick. We're excited to hear your story.
Yeah, kind of similar to Skyman's. I started playing when I was just 10 years old because my 5th grade teacher in middle school, he was playing and he started a club for the kids. And there's a local game store like 15 minutes from where I used to live. So I would go there and I made friends in their little store, and I'll just go on the weekends and play. Same thing, my mom would drop me off in the morning on Saturday and pick me up in the evening. Didn't really have any clue what I was doing, made up rules. Was a 10-year-old playing 40K. What do you expect?
Of course, yeah.
And then I always had a competitive knack, no matter what I did. So when the store ran little RTTs, or if there was a local tournament nearby, I would try to go, and usually I would suck and lose terribly. But I didn't care. I just wanted to play and get better. Like, I didn't. As a kid, you don't really think of it in terms of success. You just think of it like, I'm having fun. So I kept at it, and you do something long enough, you will just get better at it, hopefully. And that's kind of what happened to me. And then I started beating my local friends consistently, and then I was like, okay, I want to try to go to a larger tournament. And then I did, got my butt kicked over there a few times. And then, again, I just persevered through it. And a couple of years down the road, I started to see some real success. And then fast forward a few more years, and then I'm winning Adepticon stuff, and the rest of it's history.
Yeah, that sure is. Okay. Wow, yeah, that's very nice stories. I think not everybody knew about you guys so far. So yeah, thank you, for being like an open book there. And regarding, when we talk about the playing itself, it would be also very interesting, of course, as a competitive player on the highest level. At some point, you have to kind of know a lot of armies, just, to know what you're facing. But also, of course, you will play different armies at some point. But if you had to define like your play style, and also a play style that you personally really enjoyed to play, what is your play style, and why do you like that play style? So yeah, maybe there we would start off now with a different order. Simon, Skari, and then Nick again.
Could you just repeat the question, because the sound quality was a little mixed up for a second there. Maybe it was just for me. I don't know.
Oh, okay, no problem.
I
also saw your message there. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better.
All right. So the question evolves around, what is, if you had to choose like a play style that defines you, so what would be your play style, and why do you enjoy playing it?
That's a very tricky question, because once you've been playing 40K for quite some time, I've been playing the game for like 20 years, maybe more than that, not competitively, but still playing. You just play all the armies because you want to see everything there is. So when you narrow it down to what do I really do enjoy in tournaments, I think it's really, I didn't really pick it consistently. It's more that it came to me, and it is armies that are very methodical, you can play very consciously, that have very little psychic powers, very little important single dice rolls, lots of shots, resilience, movement, tricks. So something like Tau, Orcs, Necrons, Guard, that can make up some bad dice rolls or some poor general decisions by just sort of the resiliency of the army. So I've never been a fan of bum rushing enemies or playing very skewed armies. I've always liked to sort of outmaneuver and be on a very consistent level with the armies. When you just have like 500 shots that are very low quality, the consistency on average is much better than you have like 15 shots which are on a very good quality level. So that's what I enjoy, and I think it served me quite well, because you can sort of make sure that your skills determine your game, and not some couple of dice rolls like do I get off warp time or not, and that just determines whether you win or lose sometimes.
Okay, so my play style is I like very maneuver based like playstyle armies. So armies that require being using the table space. And I really, really enjoy armies that don't necessarily have like any one part of the army. This is since I've been playing forever. Even though I played, assault terminators back when they were amazing with lightning claws and things like that. I never had like a single element of my army that was like the be all end all, like key to victory. I tend to play armies that have a little bit of strength in the entire army, which allows me to almost lose my entire army sometimes and still be relevant in the game. And I find that I play best when I have very limited resources. However, I'm playing to the mission specifically, which allows me to win the game even though it seems like I don't have much left on the table. And as long as an army that I'm playing can do that, I tend to be very, very comfortable in game.
You have only played Dark Eldar, right? Sounds like it.
I played. That would be a good descriptor, wouldn't it? No, I have played everything from Black Templars to Necrons to a variety of things. Competitively, however, it has been mainly Dark Eldar. However, I have dabbled with the Astra Militarum and some Imperium soup lists as well.
Awesome. So for me, my playstyle is both similar to Simon's and also totally opposite. I think we all share that we focus in the movement phase and things we can control, maneuverability.
Yeah.
But whereas Simon kind of gears away from randomness and shies away from psychic powers, things like that, for focusing on things like Tau and Guard, who just do things. I kind of embrace the random element. I'm not looking to get lucky, but I find I play my best when I'm trying to mitigate things going bad. I like to have a backup plan for my backup plan for my backup plan. So obviously in an ideal world, I'm playing Eldar. I want to pass Doom, Jinx, Guide, Fortune. But you can't plan for that. So how can I construct a plan that has so many layers that I have different contingencies for different things happening throughout my turn? And when I can pull that off correctly, it's like a very nice orchestra. It makes me feel like I've kind of outsmarted my opponent, because it's like, whereas like a lot of players will try to copy what I'm doing, but they won't have a backup plan for if they fail warp time, they'll just lose the game. I will have backup plans for if I fail warp time, which allows me to keep myself relevant in that match, which I like a lot. Generally speaking, I am very cautious and passive and reactive, not taking huge risks whenever, even if they present themselves as potential opportunities to win, because I don't accept losing as an option for just failing a psychic power, for example, or failing a 4-inch charge. So I will go for longer multi-turn plays to have layers of planning if it gets me that level of consistency anyway.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that's really deep what the three of you just said here, right? Because I think if we break it down a little for our listeners, I think there's a lot around how you just plan for the dice, and we just had a stats class on exactly that. And I think there's a lot to it, either just adding more volume of shots or dealing with randomness in one way or the other. I've heard a lot around movement and control the things that you can control, and also planning ahead in terms of as randomness kicks in, which it always will as we're playing a dice game. What's the backup plan that you have, and how much backup plan do you need to have? Which I think is the slight difference or variation that you, Nick, have in your list, or the way you want to play, versus what Simon mentioned, where he's focusing more, or he tries to play armies that rely less on randomness or the key things to go off. Whereas you say, I want that to go off, but if it doesn't, then I still have ways to play the game with a situation where I, for example, don't have Shining Spears out in the open and I didn't get my move against psychic power off, and now I'm done because I lost the Shining Spears for nothing.
Correct.
Maybe it's
Excellent.
even just making a point here. I think I'm trying. Maybe I'm even shying away from the complexity that Nick is embracing, because when I'm thinking about my games, I usually think very hard and very long when I set up, and then like the first 2 movement phases, I could easily spend 1.5 hours thinking on that. And once these are done, it kind of all falls into place. I only think about the movement phase, and after that, I kind of press a button, and then I just roll some dice and then hand over to my opponent. That's basically what's happening in my mind. And when listening to Nick, I kind of feel like he's playing the game in much more phases. And that's maybe because I stay away from assault, because I dislike the sort of random element to that as well. But also, I just want to ask Nick. I think the most oppressing opponent and the most fearsome opponent is a very strong assault army with a very competent player, because that's moving much more than any other army on the table.
Right. I often I describe my approach to 40K. People often ask me as a coach and as a player, like, why does the assault phase suck? I can't pull things off, or why are shooting armies OP? And neither of them, shooting nor assault, in my opinion, are too strong, or they're not win conditions. Ultimately, 40K is a game about controlling the table, holding objectives, and accomplishing certain tasks. That's how you accrue points to actually win the game. Shooting and assault are both mechanisms to just deal damage to your opponent, to reduce what he has as resources, so that it's easier for you to accomplish your task without getting rebutted by your opponent's offense. They're not killing your opponent doesn't actually matter from a points perspective. So shooting just has the ability to kill your opponent so that you can go stand on objectives later. Assault can do all of it at once. It can allow you to kill your opponent, make it safer for you, while also giving you extra movement between pile-ins, consolidates, a fight twice activation, all kinds of stuff like that, to control objectives simultaneously with killing your opponent. So there's a lot more depth there. But all of it is just a means to an end. Board control is actually what wins games.
All right, yeah, and it's very interesting, what was going on in fourth year. So especially for me, as a, let's say, newer player with, like, let's say 2 years in competitive gaming, 40K right now, because having faced Simon a couple times, it's really interesting to see where your path at some point, if you evolve and make progress on yourself, how your future as a player could look like, apart from just the basics, not only moving, but how to move, and not only the mechanics, shooting and all that stuff. So it's very interesting on what you potentially can become in a positive way. I just wanted to add in here.
That's so humbling.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I told you that also in person. I'm not ashamed of it.
Excellent. To make it concreter for the audience, is there any, or what would be the armies that you would take to the next tournament if we were ever to be allowed to play tournaments again? Obviously, Skari, it's drukhari for you, but is there any kind of faction or meta faction that you're focusing on at the moment that you're thinking of when we talk about competitive play, or is it still pretty open at this point?
When I go to tournament, I like playing straight drukhari, not because it's the best, it's because I am at my best with that faction. It just meshes well with me. If I wanted to make a more well-rounded competitive list that could deal with a variety of different like situations, or I wanted to be more, quote, competitive, I would more than likely play a mixed eldar faction list. Especially adding in some of the Harlequin shenanigans that came out recently.
Excellent. And Simon, for you, is that mostly Tau, or is that pretty open across 3 or 4 different army types?
I think, well, Tau is always a staple, I think, and it still is, and it's very much so with the greater good. There's a lot of different ways that you can play Tau, some of which are quite unique in comparison to what you could achieve without the greater good book. So that's quite enjoyable, and I think Tau, I mean, I've been playing Tau quite a bit lately, so that's a good option. But also, I've been toying around a lot with NIDs and Gene Stealer Cult and variations of that, which I think are quite competitive actually, and have an edge in it as an army in itself, because it's so weird and has so many options that you kind of sometimes lose yourself in it, but also that's true for the opponent you're playing. So I very much like that play style too. So that's something that I'm very interested in. And also, I quite enjoy the Eldari faction. I have like a lot of Eldari lying around here in my room, and looking forward to the new rules coming up. So maybe that's something I enjoy.
And so, Nick, is that your call to go back to GSE, or are you still more hooked
I
to
have been
some of the other
dabbling
places?
with Tyranids a lot lately. I think a lot of what Simon says is true. That, there's so much depth to the army. There's always a play you can make, as long as you have models left. Like, I love that aspect to it. Right now, I've been playing a lot of Sisters. I'm really enjoying their unique mechanics, like Miracle Dice. Um, they don't have a play style that any other army really tries to do. So it's for me, it's about learning this new style to play 40k in, and I'm really enjoying it. When I have my Harlequins more up to speed, I'd love to play some games with some pure Harlequin stuff. I think they got so much new potential with their latest rules updates. But right now, the game is actually in a very healthy spot. You could legitimately take almost any faction to a tournament and do fairly well. So it's just about finding which one you want to play personally.
All right.
Excellent.
That's very, very good. Thank you for that, guys. Maybe another question to this is also for the people who don't know you maybe yet, would be interesting to see. Of course, you guys have quite a lot of experience which you can just draw from. But nowadays, how would you describe, your routines or your practice, state? Like the frequency? Do you have maybe a set of core sparring partners, or how do you work there? So yeah, maybe starting with Simon on this one, and then go with Skari, and then with Nick.
It's me again.
Yeah.
I'm not really representative as a 40k player in terms of practice, and I think that's for mainly two reasons. The first is I've been playing so long, and I feel 40k is a little like bicycling. You just learn the basics. I mean, to a high level, of course, but you have to learn the basics, and then you kind of start to have like your muscles remember the basics, and you can sort of devote your brain power to the more specific tasks. I feel that once you've kind of reached that status, you don't really have to train the basics too much, which sounds cocky, but I think everybody that's been playing for like 10 years kind of knows what I'm talking about. It's the same game, even though some of the rules change. So practice makes perfect, even though you kind of don't play that much. But also on the other side, I live in an area where there's not a lot of competitive players. So I kind of only play in tournaments, actually. Sometimes, like with Adrian and some other guys, I make sure that I get some practice games in, but that's mostly trying like really random stuff and not preparing for tournaments. Then I have a crew from of some guys that I've been playing with regularly, but they're far away, so I'm not being able to meet them very often. So I don't play that much. I just play tournaments basically, and that's not even a lot of games there either. So I'm probably an exception to the rule.
I mean, yeah, but still successful. We got to give you that. All right, Skari, how about you?
So right now, at least, it has been a little harder to go to tournaments. I normally play, being a content creator and being part of the Art of War team and doing like, a variety of different things. I play on average, I want to say 4 to 5 games a week when I can.
Wow.
Right now, it has definitely gone down to, maybe 2 games on Tabletop Simulator a week, maybe 3. So I'm keeping fresh with just like rules mechanics or keeping up to date with books and stuff and reading the rules. Like I definitely pride myself in taking the time to read new rules as they come out and keeping up to date with like the ebb and flow, the meta and cool combos that people are thinking about. And all in all, trying to stay creative, playing a mono faction, really makes you look at options that people tend to put aside or not really look at when building like mixed lists, because you pick the best thing from everything. But taking like a random relic that nobody really uses sometimes or whatever really comes into the forefront when you think outside the box and can really surprise you. So what I've been doing is essentially taking those out of left field ideas and putting them into practice in a limited capacity against mainly my ETC Team Canada members, which are mostly my sparring partners, as well as other like good tournament players. And then there's the other side, which is me just playing games for fun, and when I do that, I really don't care about, winning or losing, or list balance. It's just about rolling some dice and spending a couple hours with friends. And although that's not something we can do at the moment, I really enjoy having that separation of high competitive play and then fun narrative play where I want to see how many models my Archon can kill, for example.
Very cool. Thanks. How about you, Nick? I mean, I think I can guess it, but yeah, what do you say?
Well, I'm in a very unique spot since I moved down to Florida with Richard Siegler and Mark Perry, and now John Lennon is moving in. I have some of the best players in the world, literally next door or in my own house. So lately, I've been focusing pretty much entirely on content creation. So every game I play is now streamed, and I probably play 2 to 3 times a week, and that is also my practice. I'm playing a vast variety of armies. I'm playing basically a different faction every game. So there's no steady practice with a list to try to perfect it right now. When I have tournaments coming up like LVO or Nova or ETC, for example, then I will dedicate months to a specific faction to really perfect it, master every little detail. Because a lot of what Simon said is true. The mechanics of the game don't really change. The rules might, but you hit, you wound, you die, you pile in, you consolidate. It's all the same. But each army with its new rules has its own nuances that you need to learn. So that's really where I try to focus my playtesting and practicing when I have upcoming events that warrant it. Right now, I'm kind of just trying to. I'm playing 2 to 3 times a game, 2 to 3 games a week, trying to just learn every faction to a better degree, so I can help people learn it as my job as a 40K coach and a content creator. And also, it'll make me a better player as well, since I'll understand all the other factions to higher degrees when I have to go up against them.
Absolutely, absolutely. You guys brought up something with the tabletop simulator also. I heard that word falling. Maybe to round up this section, that will be also interesting for us to see maybe your opinion on that. How adequate, towards a real game would you say is the tabletop simulator? And for the order, I would just go now the other way around. Nick, you can start, and then Skari, and then Simon.
Sure. So I've only used it twice or 3 times so far. I'm very not good at it. I'm just not good at technology in general, to be clear. I think what it offers the community is really great, a way to stay connected and play 40K during this crisis where we can't otherwise do it for a lot of people. So I love that aspect. And even after Corona is done, however soon or long that may be, it'll still have practical applications. Still allows people to play internationally, which they may not otherwise be able to. It'll allow people to play test armies without having to proxy horrendously, or if they just can't get away, maybe real life is preventing them from playing games. Like Simon is not near any playtest partners who play competitively, he said. Something like that. So I think it's a great tool. I don't think it's like a 100% representation of 40K. There's a lot of give and take you have to deal with it. It's a pain to measure and whatnot. And sometimes when I try to move my gene stealers on it, I clump them all up and throw them. That doesn't happen in real life. But it's a good band-aid.
That never happened to me.
That's happened to every game.
All right.
Personally, Tabletop Simulator has been a great tool as a coach, working with the Art of War clients, or as someone who just wants to try really crazy ideas. Right now I'm playing a very, very skewed list that is all old Talos all the time, which has been super fun. But me buying that many models would be, would be prohibitive, really, unless I really committed to it. So it's nice to practice and test things. However, it has definitely been fun to be able to play people who I would have never been able to play, unless I went to like an event down somewhere in the States or something like that.
Yep. The other thing I heard from you guys in the answers before was, which I find very interesting, between sticking to an army and playing it to perfection, which I think is a bit Skari, your kind of play style, and also now it's your brand, right? With playing with Drukhari. But I think there's there's a part to it in which there could be an advice to younger players in the game to stick to an army and perfect that rather than always trying to jump to the next new hottest thing, versus a very experienced players, like all of you are obviously, but knowing the ins and outs of the game and being able to play a variety of different armies or factions and play styles, and then having something like a 2 month road to a bigger GT or super major, and then locking down on an army and practicing that, but you're kind of still trying to perfect that faction, but overall a point around, if you're kind of newer to the game, probably a benefit of practicing your army and seeing all the different situations with that army and how you master that. And that gets you up the learning curve versus just trying to jump every month to another faction without having perfected that before jumping to the next one.
I think it depends on a person's individual goal, right? Like some people that I know, they are relatively new players, but they love chasing the meta. They're like, oh, this is the next best thing, and they literally go out and buy like everything they need to run 18 centurions or whatever. However, if you do want to get, and the thing is, as Simon and Nick said, the main game dynamic doesn't change. Like moving, shooting, charging, like that sort of like basic stuff doesn't really change. It's really about understanding how to have your like army rules and whatnot interact within that framework and learn how to take advantage of it to leverage like the mission and different things like that. So playing one army will allow you to learn that sort of process faster because it keeps it consistent.
Yeah, excellent.
I think there's also another element to that, because once you start playing 40k, the amount of available information is just overwhelming. It's just too much stuff that you have to learn and you have to kind of know in all details. And I think to sort of limit frustration, it's a very good idea to just stick with one army and learn the ins and outs and just learn the other factions as you go and play against them. And I think that's a more rewarding way, let's put it that way, to learn the whole universe and to get to know all the different factions, than to try and go out and have sort of the flavor of the month army. Because and I think Nick alluded to that earlier, I think the game is in a kind of healthy state at the moment, so it's not even necessary to chase the meta and to netlist every other month. It's easily possible to win bigger and the biggest tournaments with your own army, as demonstrated by participants in this particular chat, and not have sort of the cutthroat meta list at the moment. Just being good at the army is normally quite enough to win a lot of games. And so I think that's very, it might be a relieving thought for newer players to just being able to kind of slowly grow into the hobby and not have to learn everything at once.
Yeah, to piggyback on the idea, and I do agree with literally everything Simon just said. I often coach people who love to army hop because the people who sign up for my coaching often just want to win tournaments. And they're like, Nick, I'm buying the best armies. Why aren't I winning? I'm like, you're not taking the time to learn those armies. That's the army list isn't the issue, and it rarely is. And honestly, you can win like a 60, 70 person turn with almost any faction, even if it's not super optimized, just by playing it very well. And that's really what I think people need to focus on, is learning those mechanics, learning how your army works, learning different scenarios from your perspective. And once you kind of got your feet on the ground there, then start learning different perspectives and different armies. But don't run before you can walk.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, and we've heard it a couple of times now in terms of the meta is in a good state. So I think that's the perfect transition into our second section, which was focusing on the new 2020 ITC and the quote-unquote non-existing meta. But are there any kind of bigger things you're seeing that you would say that shift a bit the meta as you were expecting it post-COVID lockdown? And maybe Nick, will start with you on this one.
Sure. I think the meta largely is dependent on within which mission set we're talking here. So, with respect to ITC, they just got a new rule set pretty much simultaneously with COVID shutting down the world. So, that new mission set really, really rewards board control. The bonus points in that mission format are much easier to achieve. There's now an emphasis on maneuver secondaries and additional maneuver secondaries for you to try to do. So if you're trying to play a defensive style where you just sit on your half of the table and shoot the other guy, if he's able to hold objectives, the majority of the objectives, collect that bonus point, and be out of line of sight, there's absolutely no way you're going to win that game if you're just trying to shoot him from your corner. There's other formats too, like Nova or WTC, where the emphasize different things. So the meta is definitely a byproduct of which system you're playing in. But I think, like we said, the game is very healthy. And like I alluded to earlier, the armies that typically do well across formats, regardless of which mission set we're talking, are ones that are dynamic and flexible, can adapt to certain situations, while also being able to do board control. And I don't mean board control from the sake of like I have 200 guys on every single objective. That's one way of doing it. But also having long threat ranges, being able to punish your opponent, or being able, just durable, to walk into the middle of the table. The fly keyword is a really great tool for board control. All of that stuff adds up to the culmination of an army. And that's what you need to be successful as an army that can take the board and deal with a lot of different situations. That's ultimately the key to success there.
Excellent. And I heard in terms of ITC, without us having tested this much more in the competitive scene, a focus more with the new 2020 missions on board control, given the mechanic of secondaries being scored more easily, and then the hold more very often now with the ease of scoring the bonus very often coinciding with the bonus, so that you have the upper hand usually when you have that board control that you mentioned, which can be different ways of having the board control. Skari, Simon, anything you want to add to the views that Nick mentioned on ITC meta or expected meta?
I think I want to just rehash what Nick said. It really varies on the mission format. You know, the different missions do encourage list building in a lot of different ways. So I think once, like, there are a lot of people putting some crazy ideas out there, and once COVID does die down, we'll really start seeing some of these ideas bear fruit. However, until then, you know, just play something that you are going to enjoy and that you're going to love learning how to play. It would be my recommendation.
I don't want to make it too boring here, so I just make a counter argument to what Nick just said. I think there's a very legitimate way of playing any mission set with a very kill-based, with a very killy army. That's what I'm focusing right now on. And I think the ITC, the changes to ITC didn't really change that particular dynamic. And it also holds true for, I think the ITC format lends itself more towards staying in a corner and being very killy than like the WTC format, so Maelstrom cards involved. And I think the matter is still at hand that you can have a brutal offense and kill your opponents within 2 turns. 8th edition is just that killy. If you're having a good setup and you're going first, which probably in ITC, preferably you want to go second, and I really like the fact that sometimes inexperienced players will give you the first turn, even though you have a very killy army, and then they just after 2 turns look at the shambles of their own pile and start to wonder what happened. And I think that still holds true, and that's one of the arguments I always make against playing ITC, is the fact that you can play this whole format, even though I'm totally aware of the fact that you two have much more experience with that particular format. But to my very little experience, it sometimes feels like that you could play that format just by being either very resilient or very killy. Both works. I think the LVO is a very good example of being very resilient. And a couple of my games with Tau, just pure offense, Tau, very little drones, like shooting from hell, to my experience, was a good example of being so killy that you don't even care about the ITC missions. You just kill your opponent in 2 or 3 turns, and then you just walk around the board and collect everything there is. Just look at the scoreboard and say, okay, I have to do that. Okay, I do that, and then I do that. And sometimes I kind of dislike ITC rules to just that particular extent. And so I kind of have the feeling that the meta is all over the place at the moment, because that's a very viable strategy, at least to my eyes at the moment, which in itself might be interesting then too.
Yeah, I for the sake of discussion, I think that was 100% true, and even favored like to sit there, be tough, and kill someone. That style was very prevalent in the last ITC packet, and you cited LVO, and they were using the last ITC packet.
Yeah,
I think in the new one, because the bonus point, specifically the bonus point, is so much more easily achieved for a board control based army that's just trying to stay alive and focus on existing in the middle of the table, not so concerned with killing you. It has shifted the dynamic, because if you think about it in terms of how the game is actually played, if you got kill and kill more, totally fine. Then you also held an objective on your corner because that's what you can do. And then if I'm doing hold and hold more, the inverse, and I kill the unit because my army is not totally useless, we're tied on primary, but presumably with hold and hold more, I'm also getting that bonus point. So what ends up happening, I often find with the dynamic, is the player who is going for the hold more bonus point just needs to survive long enough to, with a lead, 3-2 lead on primary, and presumably you're also achieving your maneuver secondaries, to hold out for 4 turns, we'll say, of creating a points deficit, and then, he's tabled or functionally tabled. There's nothing left. It's just guys hiding behind a wall doing nothing. And can you catch up with your super killing army in those last turns, bottom of 4, turn 5, turn 6, to make up that deficit of 4 points that I got the bonus point, or all the maneuver secondaries that I got that you have to go to achieve? And ground control is a big help to that. Like, ground control definitely lends itself to, your table at the end of the game, here's 4 points for me to make up for it. But that's kind of the dynamic I find with a lot of ITC matches, where if you just go for that pure killy, shooty army that sits in the corner, ask questions about the mission later, it can work for sure, but it also is a dangerous game you're playing, because if you get yourself in too big of a hole early, it's hard to dig out of it.
No,
and that's totally true.
I want to add to that, to this part of the discussion, and say that a lot of the ITC dynamic also, well, ETC to an extent as well, but ETC has a very set structure in terms of teams and matchups and whatnot. Or WTC, my bad. But when you're looking at the ITC, the terrain as well makes a big difference. And I think not only is it the mission, but in order to mitigate a lot of these quote killy style things, there's a very big move to make sure there's a decent amount of terrain on the boards, and that being able to hide is a huge part of that mission format.
To just piggyback off that, and then I'll let Simon rebuttal. Another change that's more subtle in the ITC packet is majority of the missions now, I think every mission except for mission 1, allows you to control where objectives are to some degree, whether they're player placed or once they're on the table, you move them around, something like that. Which in the last packet is pretty much just 1 or 2 missions out of the 6 that allowed you to player place them. So in the previous packet, if you got stuck with your objectives just not behind a wall in the open, you couldn't do the strategy of hide and just exist. You would have to hold that objective and get shot in the face. Now it's a lot easier to hide while holding objectives to also go along with this plan.
Which I think is funny, because that's specifically true for the American way of playing with the terrain, like these big Ls, which I think are quite boring, because it always is very sort of symmetrical, and then you kind of have this blocked space in the middle where there's obviously a big advantage for things like Grey Knight Terminators or Grotesque or whatever, or Aberrants a year ago, half a year ago. And that's it's obviously a terrain that is sort of intuitively good, because it's countering the shooty army from hell in the corner, but it's also making for very poorly dynamic games where it's
almost
sort
predictable,
of it's very predictable, and the choice of side doesn't really matter either. And I think that's then the conclusion that you arrived at is very logical, because everything is true once you see these kind of boards and the mission set, and then you kind of end up with the army that Richard Siegel played at LVO. Is that fun? I don't know, really.
He himself is the first to admit that it was not fun.
That's what I'm getting at. It's not the point to argue here. But last point to make on the sort of the crazy aggressive strategy. I think it's kind of funny to observe how many people are tuning their army design to deny secondaries, which then reduces the point per point efficiency of the units that they are taking, like land speeders as a good example, or making sure that everything is below 120 points. And sometimes that goes to such a degree that if you just straight out get killy stuff and blow your opponent off the table because it's not very, very balanced, they kind of denied all the secondaries, and you just pick, like, you just set ground control and reckon, and now you can score 2 points of reckon and 2 points of engineer in one turn. You just need 2 turns to get all your secondaries, and then maybe like 2 turns, 10 points in primary. Sounds good.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, though. I'm definitely used to the American culture here, where there's 2 L's in the middle and then some stuff on the sides, and that lends itself to this play style where you can be defensive in the middle of the board and just sit there. But if you don't have that kind of standardized terrain, or if you go into a format where it's unknown terrain, maybe you'll have the L's, maybe you won't. It definitely changes the meta there. Terrain's huge, as Skari was pointing out earlier.
Which then explains why ETC was always such a funny tournament.
Especially also in here in Europe or in Germany, from what we saw last year, and also moving on this year, hopefully, which continues, is that there's a lot more terrain on tournaments. So we still don't see so much, the symmetrical ways, like the L shapes in the US, for example. But we definitely see a lot of more terrain, and also line of sight blocking terrain where you could even hide, flyers or Mortarians and stuff like that. So which makes the game, I think, more interesting and more factions viable. However, we Germans or people in the German-speaking area still like at least some, random terrain setups and some asymmetrical stuff in there to have at least some variety or variance, right?
But just on the note of terrain, do you guys find that it's a bit of a crapshoot if you just get a terrain with a table with literally no terrain on it or no functional terrain? Your otherwise a very well thought out, awesome strategy is now debacled, and it's not one of those things like, yes, you can always plan for some tables have no terrain, but it's really, really near impossible to design an army that functions well with tons of terrain and no terrain at the same time. So how do you kind of remove that level of randomness to a point of like it just feels bad?
I think from the point of the German tournament scene, there's a lot of terrain. It's just not to the extent of line of sight blocking and diameters and 10 inches height that you have with the Ls in America. I think there's a lot more different kinds of terrain, like smaller ruins, like forests, craters, larger line of sight blocking, like walls and stuff, that sort of give a more dynamic approach to the sort of thinking that you have to prepare for the whole setup. Because at least from what I've seen, maybe there's a couple of tournaments in the US scene which have like a random element to their terrain, but everybody else kind of goes along the lines of Ls. At least I think you have stayed away from the enclosed boxes, which I find is quite good. But the terrain is much more random, but it's also much more sort of evenly distributed, and choosing sides makes a big difference. So that I think sometimes you have an advantage with your specific army on a specific table against a specific opponent, and sometimes you have a disadvantage, and that makes you have to think on your feet. And this is what I enjoy as a person.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. It gets monotonous playing on the same table 100 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons I advocate. I think even though you have the same features, I feel like asymmetrical terrain would be very good. So the two sides of the table are not the same. So picking to go first, giving the opponent an advantage to, say, deploy, and then to pick a side after they know they're going second, say in the ITC, I think it would make going first and second, that choice, a lot more important in the game.
Right. I can't even tell you the last time I considered which side I was going to be on. They're all so symmetrical, it literally doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's so sad, isn't it?
It is. It was literally last ETC is the last time I cared.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to call out is also in Germany, it's quite diverse because we have three different tournament formats. So we have the Tabletop Masters, which is very similar to the WTC format. We have Ars Bellica, which is the German version of ITC, and we're now starting, and that's also what we want to promote, more and more ITC format. And I think there's also in building the list and in preparing for the tournaments, at least from my experience, there's a bit of also adjusting to what you expect from the tournament organizers in terms of the terrain they put out. So there's some who put out much lighter terrain than others, and there's still some that put out very, say, very structured terrain, and they even publish the terrain setups or standardized setups or a set of setups in their mission pack. And I think that that's something that we'll probably also see more and more in Europe and also more and more in Germany. And also linking to our sponsor, Alliance Open, who is one of the, or at the forefront of helping to standardize and bring more consistency into the table setup. Not saying that every table should look the same, but I think with things like the Alliance Open terrain setup, there's more consistency on tables where you can also build strategies around at least being able to hide a squad of infantry out of line of sight. Not necessarily a knight and a Mortarion, but still something in line of sight.
You can definitely see that also, especially for the German-speaking, market, and for the bigger tournaments which were planned, but obviously they're postponed now. They got bigger and bigger, and it's very interesting that these guys from Alliance Armory Open, for example, they're having a big part in also sponsoring or supporting on these tournaments, and the focus is even more on creating a good atmosphere and good vibes. It's not only the tournament itself, it's more like also the venue, it's the tables, it's the whole setup, it's the food and all that stuff, which was really on kind of a hype train. And also, especially we from Kings of the Hill, as we spar a lot, we are definitely gearing up to play on tables with much more terrain than before.
Excellent. Which actually, I think a lot of the discussion went into something that we wanted to test out, and for the reasons that Adam for Australia isn't here, as well as we talked a bit about differences in play style, which very often goes back to also the terrain setup across the different geographies. I will skip that question in terms of whether you see any other kind of differences in terms of how you see games being played in, say, North America versus Europe. But one thing that I thought was interesting is it almost feels like ITC in the 2020 mission format is very predictable in the sense that it's usually, or it feels like it became simpler to score the secondary. So you would calculate on pretty much the 12 points there, and then as Nick you were alluding to, it's a game for the bonus point and the who has hold and or kill more, and that basically being the red race there. Do you see a difference when you compare the IT, and pretty much you said you do, but probably more, what is the difference there also when you plan your strategy and your army composition, when you plan for an ITC format where it sounds that you can calculate much more in how you want to play this with the points that you're getting, versus say more in WTC style where there's randomness with cards and other things involved. What's the difference between something that's very predictable and calculatable versus formats that are eluding themselves a bit more to randomness?
Were you asking me? Or
yeah, probably you, Nick, and then going the round.
Sure. I think the formats are actually quite similar. They do have, of course, their differences, and you're absolutely right. ITC is calculatable. Like I could tell you, like on turn 2, potentially to within 1 to 2 points, what the score of that game will be by just reading the table. That's not possible in WTC because it's random with the cards and stuff. From a list design perspective, in WTC, I think there's a lot more reward for taking smaller, cheaper, throwaway type of units that are just efficient type of things, like solo land speeders, 2-man drone squads from Tau, that kind of stuff. To go out, you draw supremacy and you want to hold 3 objectives to score some points. You can throw a land speeder away, get 2 points out of it, and then it's not the worst trade ever. and you don't lose anything you really care about. And like in a pinch, it's a dynamic unit. You can use it as a flying screen. You can use it to move block, all kinds of stuff. And ITC, there's still value to taking those kinds of units in case if your army is one that sits in the corner and tries to shoot your opponent off the table. You might want to try to interact with the objectives before turn 5. So maybe you take those land speeder type things. Again, it's a flying screen. It can interact with the board. It can go hold an objective. And the difference is in ITC, it's very calculatable. I trade this hold point for the kill that the land speeder gives up. That's a net even trade. Is that worth making? In WTC, it's a lot more dynamic and hard to calculate because yes, I'd have hold objective 4. I can move my land speeder out there. He'll get a kill point out of it. But is that going to matter? Because what is the kill point differential going to ultimately be? Does this potentially unlock his Maelstrom cards? Like if he needs to kill a unit with the fly keyword, now he can do it. There's a lot more complexity to that decision point. So I don't know that it really necessarily changes the list design phase because it's hard to plan for what you can't plan for example. But there's a lot more to consider with your decision-making processes when you're actually playing the game in WTC, whereas in ITC, it's kind of robotic. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I will just execute it.
I want to add in there because I think it's the sort of the sad story of this very clean and lean mission design that ITC obviously has, is the fact that you can very much list design and prepare for the whole thing. And you then do your thing, and it doesn't really interact that much with your opponent, especially if you have a lot of Ls on the table. And in WTC or the Tabletop Masters format, which we do have in Germany, when I do plan for that, I always think about movement. And when I plan for ITC, I almost never think about movement. Because at least to my eyes, movement is not really rewarded in ITC. But it's much more rewarded in WTC because the random element kind of forces you to move, even though you probably don't want to move. You're sort of a static gunline type of army, and then the cards or whatever mission design you have then tells you to go out on the board, and then in this particular turn hold 3 objectives in the middle of the board. And after that, the opportunity is gone. You have to discard the Maelstrom card or whatever happens. And that forces a degree of flexibility in your army that ITC does not. And to add to that, I think in the last maybe 2 or 3 turns of the game, depending on how crushing the game went, in ITC you then can just sort of do your thing and collect all the points that you knew before you would collect then, after you've defeated the opposing the strategic elements of the opposing force. And in WTC you cannot be sure that you'll then in the end draw the cards you need. You have to sort of keep on scoring progressive, because in the end it is a random element to that. Even though the new rules allow you to have more streamlined decks, it still forces you to interact much more, at least to my eyes.
I agree with that completely. And also, even further to that point, a lot of the Eternal War components of the WTC missions are scored turn by turn progressively. So there's no ground control at the end of the tunnel for you to collect all your points on turns 5 and 6. If you're just waiting that long, you might not score any points in certain missions.
Exactly.
And I'll just finish off this whole train because I agree with both of you. But I do want to say this. I feel WTC, or the WTC format, like a format that is more, I find, more true to what the game design was in the first place. I feel like it's a more complete way of playing the game, even though some people might not like the randomness of the cards or this and that. I feel like it definitely tests you more at a strategic level when playing than just going, oh, did I kill something? Oh, did I hold something? And then did I, remember to get my bonus this turn or whatever. However, I feel that in a growing competitive world where people are playing from all over the world and not just at the WTC level, but just like players wanting to play tournaments and run events, the value of the ITC format cannot be understated. I feel like it gives such a solid framework that's easy to understand, easy to implement, that anybody can really run with it. And I think the value is more than just the game design. It's about building that sort of set of standards that no matter what event you go to in the world, as long as it says, hey, we're playing ITC format, you know exactly what you're running into. and I think that just the value of that is not to be understated.
To piggyback on that idea, it's also a much simpler format than WTC. I think as competitive players who have been playing this game for 10 plus years, all of us, we have no problem picking up and playing the complexity that is WTC without much work. We're trying to expand the game to a lot of newer players and grow the community as a whole. That's ultimately what we all want. And throwing them in the deep end that is WTC, where you have 3 different scoring things to keep track of, and then randomness, a different mission to accomplish every turn, and then WTC especially has weird kinks they just throw into the missions because they're weird. That's overwhelming to a newer player. So did I kill something? Did I hold something? Kill the tanks if he's got tanks, big game hunter. Kill the characters if he's got characters, headhunter. Stand in these quarters. Very simple format for ITC. So I think that is very attractive to newer players that aren't experienced enough to comprehend the more subtle nuances between the formats. And I think that simplicity is a key for expanding this hobby right now.
Yeah, and I can
Totally agree.
second that as being a newer player, it was very easy for me as a player who's just been in the game for 6 months, literally in the game since I first played my first 40k game, to fly over to Canada and play Skari in ITC games, or go to Amsterdam or the UK or Germany, and it was always very clear. Whilst now getting more into the WTC or the tabletop master style, it's still very confusing for me as a player what I need to take care of, in addition to mastering my own army and keeping the enemy in control. So I would definitely second, if we are looking at spreading out the game and building that international tournament circuit, I think ITC does a very good job in making it as simple as possible while still being competitive and measurable. And I think there's also the perfect time to link to a podcast that we have with Reese, also in our ITC Focus Week, where we just go about or talk a bit about the background of the mission of Frontline Gaming and how they started the ITC circuit, and also how they see the missions of what they want to develop in the future. So that's also a link we put down in the description below.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating because we can. At first, it was a feeling, and we could see that the ITC format was spreading also through the German-speaking area, and also when we look at our numbers, we look at the views and also the impressions from the viewers and the listeners, what they consume from us and want to see from us, and also the feedback that we receive. It's really interesting that ITC is basically has one of our, is very popular on our channel, we can say, right? So this is also maybe a good segue to go into the next section, if there's no open point from that one, because we were just talking about the state of ITC being kind of a plug and play format. You basically read through the rules, etc., and you play a couple games, and you're basically good to go. So when it comes to new players, which you want to get into this beautiful hobby, and especially players who also get this taste of blood and want to become the best version of player they can be in, let's say, the shortest time. What would you say from your standpoint? Is there a minimum time investment that they have to make? And if there is, what would they look like, if they want to, get to the, let's say, highest level of competition in 40K? From the order, I would say starting with Skari, then going with Simon, then with Nick.
Okay, so the number one thing is you have to, if you want to improve, you have to be passionate, and you have to have the mentality to like a championship mentality, where if you're going to learn how to play something or do better at something, you're going to have to learn how to get beaten up and then come back and ask for more. And I think that sort of mentality is really important. The second thing I'd like to do is rehash the importance of coaching. It might, especially if you want to take the game seriously competitively. Yes, for example, we at the Art of War, we do coaching with Nick and a variety of different game experts. That really makes the learning curve of the game a lot faster and a lot quicker, to the point where you could be looking at winning events in a fraction of the time that you would or hitting your goals a fraction of the time that you would if you had to basically play every single game out, one game at a time. And last but not least is, be objective about what your goals are. You have to have like a clear game plan of what you want to achieve. It's and be realistic, within your frame. If you can only play one game a week to prepare for an event, your process to get better at the game is going to be slower than someone who can play, 5 games a week or 6 games a week. There's always going to be somebody out there who's like training harder and who, probably is going to get there faster, but you have to have an idea of what your framework's going to look like.
All right.
That's my suggestion.
Thanks a lot, Skari.
Sounds great.
Simon?
Yeah, I can only add to that. I think the number one important thing is to play better players. And maybe that's the same with coaching, right? You just get a coach and then you sort of play and play test and be advised to play better players, and then the whole virtuous cycle starts. And I think the speed in which you pick up the game, at least from what I've seen with newer players, is very much determined on the fact that whether you were playing like your mates from school in your basement, or if you went to like a local, like Nick said in the beginning, to like a local friendly gaming store, and then started playing other guys that were just beating you up and you had no idea why, and then you started to pick up their tricks, and then the guys in your basement were sort of no match anymore. And I think that's the competitiveness that you need to have, just being able to play on a constant level, play better players, and then once you beat them, play even better players, and just continue on that trend, because that's the only thing that you'll learn, and that's the only way in which you can learn quickly in 40k, I think, because it's a very the skill ceiling in this game is very high, I think, so you can learn the basics in a couple of months, that's no problem. But when you start seeing all the little nitty-gritty tricks that good players can pull off even in like dire circumstances, you then realize that there's like a universe of complexity that you can achieve only by like moving in a certain way. And last but not least, I think the number one thing I see players losing for is a lack of concentration. Concentration is a muscle, actually, that can be trained. And there's a lot of talk about good players being like very robotic on the tabletop and like not chatting that much. Maybe Nick is an exception, I don't know. But
I'm absolutely an exception.
at least people always tell me like, man, you just look so focused, and you like never talk like smack talk or stuff. At least not if it's my turn. I never do, and that's I don't even realize. I have a tunnel view, and I think that's a very key aspect of being a good and becoming a better player, is just focus really hard on the couple of key decisions that you have to make in your turn, and then relax and go get a coffee or whatever when your opponent is moving the miniatures. And if you get good at that, you can keep up the concentration over the course of 3-4 hour game, and then you'll make less mistakes, and that's what keeps you winning on the highest level.
All right.
Yeah, so kind of to echo with that, I find that immersing yourself in 40k is really the most effective way to really pick up this hobby. It becomes almost a lifestyle to a degree as well as a hobby if you really want to go to the distance to become a truly competitive player. You don't have to be playing all the time. That's infeasible. And, I've never really ever in my life played more than like 1 to 2 games a week, really. So what you have to do is thinking about it in your spare time, reading about it in your spare time, watching videos, just following the scene. And, it sounds like homework. It sounds like a chore. To a degree it is, but you have to want to do it. You're never going to be successful at something you don't want to do. So if you want to do it, it'll come naturally. You'll just do it. And then that's ultimately how you kind of become successful. I think the number one mistake I see players making is they love to blame dice. This is like a motto of mine. I just don't blame the dice. I don't care if you fail a 3-inch charge with a CP reroll. Why were you in that position where you could have failed that? I don't care that everything went wrong or you got seized on. Oh my God, seizing is my biggest pet peeve. There's always something you could have done better. Maybe a more conservative approach, maybe a different list approach. Maybe your list has too many risks associated with it in the list design phase. We were talking about that a while ago, where relying on warp time or quicken to pull off your plans is not going to win you the tournament. It's going to lose you. It's going to fast track you to 4-1 because you're going to lose that game you failed warp time. So there's always levels of consistency you're trying to find, and the best players are always seeking ways to mitigate the impact of rolling bad, because everybody rolls bad. But we're not just gambling here. We are playing calculated games of Warhammer. So it's about mitigating the impact that rolling bad can have upon you by having really concrete, sound plans. So just don't fall in that tunnel vision. Accept responsibility for your losses, and that's the fastest way to improve.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, on that. I really want to add something to this here, because this is not about me putting me out there, but I find it so fascinating hearing these three people, all talking different points. And for me, if I want to title myself, let's say, a younger player in the competitive scene, I can totally agree to all of that being said, because I'm doing all of this, what they say. So, for example, last year was a year where I took, or where I tried to participate in as many tournaments as possible. So this was just to see, what's going on there, to connect with people, etc. Then I was trying, to leverage my game and see where I can improve. So, of course, I would ask after every game, what could have done better, etc. Then I took coaching, for example. Also, I'm not shy, to do that, because I see really value in that, and it's fun, and it's also a nice way to get a new perspective, to reflect on yourself. And then of course play the best players you can play. That was also a very eye-opening event this year when we, I think we all Kings of the Hill, we went to Amsterdam and played the Ironman, which was a one-day tournament with 5 games in one day until 2:30 a.m. in the morning. And there we had the chance to play. I think I played on that tournament. I played 3 ETC players from different countries. And it was mixed. I won some, I lost some, but it was really, really interesting. I learned so much it's just eye-opening. And for me, it was like, I don't know, it was crazy. After that, for me, a new world opened up. Because at first, as you guys said, you play with your local people, you play your local nemesis or whatever. Then you go to your first RTT, etc. You play a one-day tournament with 3 games. Then maybe you try a 2-day event, then you try an international event, and you see there's always more. There's always, someone who's much better, much stronger, which, you don't have to take shame in it. You can just learn from that. For me, it was really, really interesting. So I really appreciate what you guys said there, and I'm really following on that stuff. And hope that there's even so much more to see on that point. Yes. I mean, there was so much you guys were saying. Is there, apart from the game table, something that you guys maybe do in terms of? I mean, you said some things about consuming, additional content, reading, etc. But what is there something you do outside the game table? Like maybe something for your mind, sports, nutrition, or maybe even meditating or something, something like that. So that would be also interesting, I think, for our listeners. Starting with Simon, going with Nick, and then with Skari.
Actually, I don't even know if it's clever to put me first here, because I'm like a very bad example. I do none of that.
Yeah, okay.
I started to care about my nutrition because my stomach went bad a month ago. Then I don't meditate. I should, but that's more because of stress and work than 40K. And I don't really do any sort of mental or other exercise to prepare myself for 40K. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I do enjoy 40K so much because it drags me away from all the rest of the stress in my life and work and every other obligation that I might have, and just go out there for a weekend and you just get smacked. You come back and you always at least I always tell myself, why did I actually do that? It's so stressful and it's such a drain on your body, but it's also so cool. So this is this is maybe my way of doing it. I'm excited to hear what the others are doing. Maybe they meditate like 10 hours a day. I don't know.
That'd be Nick for you.
That's what
He'd
I
be
do.
like, dice rolling.
There's a very funny meditation story I have, but I don't think it's appropriate for this podcast. For me, I try to be well-rounded. 40K very much consumes my life. I'm in a very unique spot for that because it is also my full-time job, and I'm growing a brand, and it's my hobby. So any entrepreneur will tell you that your entrepreneur adventure consumes way more than 40 hours a week of your daily recommended or your weekly recommended amount of work. It's more like all of it. And then as of my hobby too, I can't escape work by going to 40K. That's just going deeper into work. And sometimes I do, because I enjoy it. But I try to do the things that make me feel less consumed and more like a well-rounded human. So I do exercise. I try to go out and see friends. I watch TV. I'll read a book. I'll go for walks. Just doing stuff to try to ease my mind, I guess, because any sports trainer or physical athlete or anything, they will always tell you to take rest days. So if you're 100% always just going in like, here's my job, and then I'm into 40K, here's my job, and I'm into 40K, and that's all you do, you're not resting your mind, you're not relaxing, you're not letting yourself recover from those mental taxations. So you need to kind of just be a human, is my response.
All right,
The
and
other thing
Skari?
I want to
Oh, sorry, Hanyu.
Yeah, just one thing I want to pick up on, Nick, because I was really surprised when you said you play about 1 to 2 games a week and you never played more than that. So to me, it feels like I'm playing 2 to 3 games a week and I'm frustrated that I can't play more. And I guess there's still rest involved, even if I would be able to play more. But I was very surprised that you, quote unquote, only play 1 to 2 games per week.
I mean, this goes back to what I always say as a coach. You don't have to be playing to be practicing. I'm running through theoretical scenarios in my mind all the time. Like, I think about 40K whilst I'm going to sleep. I coach people nonstop in 40K, and I'm trying to I just read 40K, watch YouTube videos, that kind of stuff. So it's always going on, but that doesn't mean I have to be playing the game. And like, there are exceptions that obviously a tournament I'm playing 5 games in a weekend, or if I have LVO coming up and I got a practice weekend together with my buddies, we'll knock out 7 games in 2 days. But on an average, like my usual life to life, week to week is 1 to 2 games a week, I'd say.
Wow, so this gives me hope.
Yeah. All right, Skari, you're still on, right?
Yes, I am still on. I just, it's been awesome hanging out with all of you folks and chatting. So, personally, like Nick, gaming and content creation is my full-time job. Working, coaching, and making battle report videos, and podcasting, and doing and painting and streaming. But it is, as Nick said, wholesome time consumption. And if you don't unplug, it does make you crazy. One of the things that I do is I don't film everything. I went through a phase where I literally filmed like everything that I did. And I ended up starting to appreciate times when I just needed to turn the cameras off and go back to just playing games with friends in my basement. I feel like being able to draw clear lines between work Skari and just my own personal life, I think has been very, very important. On another note, I have been reading to just like, I've recently read some like just Black Library books. So I'm still immersed in like what I love, but just doing it in a different way. And last but not least, I've been, it might not be meditation, but I've been playing a lot of Minecraft with my 8-year-old son,
it's like
which has been really fun. It is like meditation. You just like walk down a line and hit little blocks and then build stuff. And it's like playing Lego, but as a grown person and on a computer. And doing it with my 8-year-old son has really sort of like helped me stay sane, where I have something to talk about with him that he's very passionate about, that I've sort of taken on to learn, but has nothing to do with Warhammer, which has allowed me to sort of, when I focus on Warhammer, I'm very focused, very dedicated, but it allows me to have that like unplug button. and something else that I enjoy, that I have somebody to play with or enjoy it with.
Oh, that's great,
I
man.
also go out a lot. Like, I enjoy being social. I go on a lot of dates. I go to parties and clubs and bars when the world isn't ending. So that's just completely separating myself from the Warhammer scene is a good way for me personally to kind of keep up with Warhammer in a way, because it keeps you sane, like Skari said.
Yeah, I mean,
You needed to throw that in to just make sure that you're like a normal person, not only like playing Warhammer and then reading a book and then playing Warhammer again.
Yeah, I gotta make sure everyone's got the full picture here.
yeah, no,
Very well rounded.
you rescued yourself. No worries about that. No, it's really interesting because we from the Kings of the Hill, we are basically, and I think that also counts for Simon on that one. We are not all doing 40K full time. We have our ladies, we have our jobs and all that stuff. So that's all good. And also if we look at Kings of the Hill, we all the three of us, we have different approaches to the game. Also what we do outside outside the game table. For example, what works for me is I can. That's only a short one. Meditation I can recommend to anyone. It's good for your for your sanity. It's good for your inner core and all that stuff. But I don't want to dig deep into that. But for me, what also works very well is a lot of sleep. Not maybe like super, not like 80 hours, but enough sleep before a game, whether it's a tournament or a sparring game or whatever, because it really strengthens my concentration. And also the nutrition during the game, because there are a lot of tournaments which I've visited. They always have heavy food, So if you can avoid the lunch or the evening food and go a little lighter on that one, that will also help you a lot. I would say maybe add to that.
Stay away from the cheese.
Yeah, the sleeping thing is very important. Before, when I was starting in competitive play, I'd make the mistake of painting like 2,000 point army like the week before the event, and end up staying up way too late the night before the event and then having a bad sleep. And once I started playing competitively and taking like a career in competitive 40K seriously, I started really making sure that I got enough sleep before an event, and that during the event I'm staying hydrated and sitting down as much as possible, and that sort of thing as well. Another thing is 20-minute workout every single day.
Oh, that's good.
Which has been really good. Yeah.
We have one exception in the team, which is our third guy, Chris, who's preferably playing orcs. I've never seen a guy like this. The more beer he drinks, the better he performs. And that was not only one tournament; that was every tournament we went to. So it was really interesting to see. But that's not something that we recommend.
I thought you guys had done your homework on me. I mean, that's people have been saying that about me for years.
I thought it was upon me to bring up that point, but you did it yourself. That's good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, and I can relate to the preparing and sleeping well before tournaments, because actually last year when I went to my first tournament ever, I was so freaking out on the painting standards and WYSIWYG. So I painted up my last models until 4 a.m., freaking out on it, ripping arms apart and putting other weapon options on. So they're all WYSIWYG. And in my first game in the morning, I had everything perfectly painted and WYSIWYG, but I was so tired, I actually moved all my army out, and my opponent was asking, why did you move everyone away from the objectives? And I completely lost that game. So definitely, I think preparation and sleep is absolutely important to play the best game you can play at that given day.
All right. I think we have made it. Right, Hanyo?
I think so.
I mean, for me personally, I have to say, from what I remember, was a really. I think there are some really great insights, from special players and very good players in this hobby and also profession. And do you want to do the segue to the last round, Hanyu?
Absolutely. So I think just a very quick question to each of you on, because I recognize it's a whole topic in itself, but last question there. Any final tips you could give any of the listeners in terms of how to build lists? And I know it's a full topic in itself, so trying to have short answers there, maybe starting with Simon.
It's a whole topic for itself. Sorry. If I can only give one tip, it's probably think about the setup, like setting your list up on the game table in the first turn. You have the first turn. This is your list. This is the terrain. How do you set up against a number of different armies? And when I picture a list in my mind and I just write it down on Battlescribe or whatever, or move the models on my table, it's very theoretical. But once you start thinking about scenarios, like, okay, this is like, I have these two L's and then I set up my stuff and this is how it's going to look like, then I immediately get a more intimate feeling about whether I want to play that thing because it seems to be powerful, or if I'm feeling like on the back foot already, because the deployment and the first turn is easily most important thing in the whole game. And so don't just do it on Battlescribe. Just think about the scenario, just the first turn or the deployment against a number of different armies. If the deployment kind of works, you can start building from there. But sometimes it happens to all of us. You come up with an army and then you play it against a friend. It's just that the setup doesn't really work. There's no line of sight blocking in your deployment zone, and it all goes to shit in a matter of minutes. And that's what you figure out once you start thinking about like only the deployment. That's fine. Just a quick test. Deploy your army.
That sounds great, no?
Excellent. Nick, how about your top tip for army building or how to become better as a player?
I think you need to identify your playstyle and then pick an army that suits your playstyle. So we talked about playstyles earlier, but it could also be like aggressive versus defensive. Are you the kind of guy that wants to charge him? Or are you just going to sit in your own castle and shoot him and then go out when it's safe? Are you a risk taker, or are you very conservative with your risk analysis, probability, acceptability of risk type things? And then just like, do you like fast, tricksy units, or do you like durable units? And even as someone who doesn't understand 40k to that degree, you can still kind of ask yourself that question. Like in real life, are you risk adverse or are you risk accepting? Are you aggressive or defensive? Are you passive when faced with confrontation and trying to negate it, or are you openly embracing confrontation? That's personality traits, and you can try that. How you are as a person will also translate to how you are as a 40k player, as crazy as that sounds. And then you can kind of pick army lists that naturally flow with who you are.
Excellent point. And last but not least, how about you, Skari?
Well, thanks for taking all the points, guys. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm not going to take too long. This has been a great podcast. I just want to say, yes, I also put my whole army that I'm thinking on the table and visualize it. I think visualizing the army and what you have in your army works wonders to really sort of understand whether or not the list is going to essentially vibe with you in that sense. And the second thing that Nick was saying as well is there's no point, if you're an aggressive player, don't play a defensive list. I find that even if you're playing a subpar, quote, competitive list or a subpar list, if you're playing something that you vibe well with, that you seem to understand, you will see a lot more success playing something that you enjoy playing, that you understand, rather than something that you're sort of forcing yourself to play because your friend said it's the best, style of list. And the only last thing is, other than that, take your time collecting different things and don't be afraid to think outside the box. Have like a core of your list or a theme that you're going to build your list around. And then don't be afraid to sort of add things in and out here and there, but don't switch the whole list while you're developing it. Just tweak it. Do little tweaks, and please, oh please, don't put all the upgrades on one unit. Just, usually don't spend too much on like random fluff when you're building your list.
Excellent. All right. I think we went through a lot of stuff. I hope it was helpful for you listeners. It was definitely helpful, and I personally learned a lot myself. So thanks again to this awesome group for taking the time on these odd times, given the different time zones. This, I think, was an excellent discussion. Last thing we want to do is to do a round of plugs and shout outs in terms of where people can find you guys if they want to connect or haven't connected to you already. And maybe, Skari, given you went last on the last one, why don't you go first on this one?
Well, I'm Skari from Skaredcast and, of course, The Art of War. So you can check us out at theartofwar40k.com, where Nick, I'm sure, is going to be putting in a whole bunch of stuff. Or look me up on YouTube at Skaredcast, or Instagram, or Facebook, or Twitter, or Patreon, or all that good stuff. Especially if you like Dark Eldar stuff, because that's my thing.
Excellent. And we'll put all of those links, not all of, so Skaredcast and Art of War down in the description, not all the other things, but just one, so you can connect. Definitely, we make sure you don't miss out on connecting to Skari. And Nick, how about you? Where can people find you?
So, like Skari said, I am the owner and brand manager of The Art of War, and we have a whole coaching network. So you can find me there, again, theartofwar40k.com. We also do weekly Twitch games now, or twice a week rather, at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I want to say that's midnight for German guys, and on Fridays. And then on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern time, that's 7 p.m. for German time.
Oh, that's good.
It's probably a lot more doable. Yeah, so you can check that out, twitch.tv/AOW40k. We also do daily paint streams, which I believe Adrian has been on a few times to hang out and check out with us.
Sure.
So you can check us out there. We have a YouTube channel, we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that jazz. So follow along and follow me on my adventures.
Excellent. And we'll put all of that down in the description below. Will be a very long description though. Excellent. Simon, any place where people can find you?
I won't make the description much longer. I used to create content for the blog. I used to run 40 Kings, which I discontinued a couple of years ago. So now I gladly enjoy not being found at all. So I'm very sorry. You can only talk to me on chats like these.
Are you shifting to be a Dark Eldar? Feels a bit like it.
I have to take lessons from Coach Skari then.
Excellent.
I will welcome you into the fold.
Oh no.
To close it out, just a quick shout out to our sponsor, Alliance Open Armory. And we, again, put a link down in the description below. And a shout out to the fellow podcasters and content creators in Germany, Target Priority. So hi to Ben and Seb, as well as the guys who've just kicked off, I think today or yesterday, actually, Bone Breaking Heads. So shout out to Fred and Bell from the German WTC team. And we'll put those links as well down in the description below. So thank you guys. This was an awesome episode, and stay tuned for next time.
Amazing.
Bye.
Much appreciated.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye,
Thank you for
everybody.
having us.
Bye.
Befeuern wollte wie ein Space Marine. Danach wechseln wir entspannen in dir Soundtrack gehen. Du kannst machen, was du willst, wir killen Screen. Kings of the Hill, kommen nicht mit War Machine. Wir rollen smooth durch die Routen wie ein Longboard und landen auf den ersten Plätzen wie eine Concorde. Und gibt es ein Problem, nur weil ihr keinen Bock habt, zögern wir nicht lange und wir von dies not Zogger. Okay, jetzt können wir nicht anfangen zu spielen. Ich komm mal kurz hier, ja?